afternoon. Welcome to services here at Walter Hill tonight. Our first song is going to be number 684. We'll sing all three verses. This world is not my home, number 684. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. They're all expecting me, and that's one thing I know. My Savior pardoned me, and now I onward go. I know He'll take me through, though I am weak and poor, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Just up in glory land we'll live eternally. The saints on every hand are shouting victory. Their songs the sweetest praise drifts back from heaven's shore, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's golden door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore.
I think Chris is looking for dramatic effect. I was letting everybody go. Everybody was getting up. I was going to let them go to class. No dramatic effect. I tell you what, I was excited to hear when Randall asked me to teach another historical lesson series. But I was like that little girl on that video. You've probably seen it. It's been sent to you, where she comes in the hallway, looks at something, walks back down the hallway. Have you seen that? When he said, let's talk about Egypt, I just about did what that little girl did. Excuse me. Because in the last 20 years, there is so much changed in Egyptology, and for the better. And Randall and I discussed it in the hallway one day. It's even getting better for Christians, because things are changing in a positive light. I'll give you one example. A few years ago, there was a stela. Now, a stela's a rock, written some history on it. These pharaohs, they love to write their history on something. If they ate at Joe's restaurant, it was put on a rock somewhere that I ate at Joe's restaurant. True story. Well, they overturned this rock, and here was this thing they call a stela. It was the history of Ramses II. And it listed all his accomplishments. It listed all his victories, and it listed his allies. And something on that stela changed the world. It was said that Ramses II had a treaty with a country called Israel. She said, well, Chris, what does that do? Well, it just rendered every study Bible printed since 2000 in trouble. Because if I have him with a treaty with Israel, when did Israel become a country when the kings came along, right? And then after the split, right? They were still Israel after the split. To say that Moses and Ramses were contemporary does what? His father. Especially in the light of 1 Kings chapter 6, which says at the year they started the temple, you may remember this, it was how many years between the Exodus and the first time they started building the temple? If you remember your history, and if you're on Jeopardy, 418. So literally overnight, in the last 20 years, a hand grenade's been thrown into the timeline. And one of my favorite professors to listen to on Egyptology is David Gore. He has all kinds, he's Wharton College Doctor of Egyptology, and he has all kinds of videos on YouTube. And even he's starting saying, you know, my chronology may be wrong, because it would have been easier to go, well, we know Ramses was around 1,250 years, and if we look at that verse in Kings, and we know Solomon around 960 something, between 960 and 967, somewhere in those 7 years, we know he started the temple. Let's go back. Well, that stela just changed everything. He even admitted that. So let's start and let's talk about Egypt. Well, that's where we got to start. And if you want to turn your Bibles to Genesis chapter 12, verse 10, we'll be talking about that in a minute. But what happened after the flood? What did the sons of Noah do? They dispersed. They've been going places around the country, around where they decided to start to live and settle. Let me see if my first slide will come up. There's a beautiful map. Not there yet. Okay.
We can use shadow puppets.
Or you use shadow puppets, is what Andy's telling me. Oh, there was a beautiful map. Imagine, if you will, you have where we know Egypt is there in Africa. And we know the historian Herodotus. Now, Herodotus was a Greek historian. We know that. We know that he was around the AD period. So, you know, we've got to look what he says. He says Egypt, the Nile gifted Egypt. If it wasn't for the Nile River, Herodotus is saying, he told things as in truths. If it wasn't for the Nile, Egypt wouldn't have existed. And you got to think, what's so great about this place? I can just see the sons of Noah who were settling here. This river flooded every year. The rains that are in the subtropical Africa flood up through the Nile, and it goes all the way through. You know, there was pharaohs began to say, hey, we should start figuring this out. And some of the pharaohs began to record the floods, especially when they were in Upper Egypt. They would record the depths of the water. So this area was fertile. It was a place where you could grow things. And this map right here, thank you guys. Look at the setup. I have the Red Sea, the Arabian Desert, I have the Mediterranean. My closest neighbor and person who give me trouble is the Hittites, and they're pretty far away. Babylon's not going to give me any trouble. Hopefully not in the early days. So in the early times, we have barriers to even getting armies coming in. So it was a great area to start somewhere. Now, next slide, if you can do it, guys. Egypt is divided into two areas, Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. And those two areas play a crucial role in the timeline of Egypt. What we found out, that you can have separate pharaohs ruling in separate areas. One can be ruling in Upper, and one can be ruling in Lower. Now, if you got to look close, it's different. We're so used to rivers flowing certain directions. This one flows from south to north. And if you look, south is called Upper Egypt, and north is called Lower Egypt. We'd think it'd be opposite, wouldn't we? And the main reason is geography. There's more mountains and there's more upper elevation to the south, and then it flows to the coastal plain. The Nile Delta, to this day, produces some wonderful cotton. Matter of fact, there's a guy that comes on TV late night that talks about his Nile River cotton. You probably have seen him a time or two, haven't you? Cotton, barley, wheat, It is an amazing area for growth today. Next slide. So here's another Jeopardy question. Trivial Pursuit. My wife's back there shaking her head. She's saying, "You nerd." Trivial Pursuit. The longest lasting civilization in history would be what? Egypt. Egypt. You know, if I look at it, and some people will say 3,000, some people will tell you 2700 BC was when the first dynasty or first kingdom was started. And it goes all the way to 30 BC. Here's the next one. Trivial question. We know that Egypt as a dynasty or as dynastic series ended in 30 BC. She died, was the last pharaoh. She had a son by the name of Julius Caesar, and then she married Mark Antony, and then at the Battle of Actium, they were defeated by Octavian, and she killed herself. Was it Elizabeth Taylor or who? Cleopatra. Yes. I'm glad some people laughed. You know, I can't tell that to the teenage class tomorrow. They go, "Who's Elizabeth Taylor?" I have to start explaining. But Egypt is divided in its history into Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, and intermediate periods. Now, this is where it gets complicated, because you can have an intermediate period between old and middle, you can have one between middle and new, and you can have one after the new. And these get scattered and tattered, and there again, you may have an intermediate period, a pharaoh ruling in Upper Egypt and one ruling in Lower Egypt. And people will think, because of chronology, timelines, oh, they ruled separately. Now we're finding things being turned over in the desert out there. Oh no, they ruled at the same time. And then you find these intermediate periods where there's no history, and there's one there right after the Middle Kingdom of about 200 to 300 years of just dust and desolation for Egypt. And it was known as the Hyssok period, or Hyssoks period, and it was these marauders, they think caravans of people just coming through and living in Egypt and not having any really government control. Well, we got to talk about, next slide, guys. Got to talk about pharaohs. You know, from the very beginning, the pharaoh was the ultimate power in Egypt. Matter of fact, this guy was in charge. Now, I feel sorry for him now. Let's think about this. He's in charge of getting up in the morning, going down to the river, and before he can even bless the river, he's got to pray to this guy named Ray or Ra, whatever you want to call him, that he brings the sun up in the morning. And if it don't come up, it's Pharaoh's fault. He didn't pray hard enough. Now get this. It gets even worse. So if the Nile River don't flood, guess whose fault's that? Pharaoh. You didn't pray hard enough. Something going on here. You're not living right, Pharaoh. The responsibility and the weight, you think it'd be cool to be king? I don't know if I'd want to be a Pharaoh. How do you sleep at night? Think about that. Literally, how do you sleep at night if you're a Pharaoh? Most pharaohs on hieroglyphs have these three symbols, and two are more important than the other. Let's talk about the one on the right, the staff. The staff, which means he's the shepherd of the people of Egypt. He guides, controls. He is their master. Now, the staff on the right is called a rod. The rod has tassels on the end, and it was mainly to control animals, right? That's what you'd think that would be for. Hey, you get in line. You're herding sheep. You're herding something. So the rod and the staff show up importantly. And I saw that, and I was studying this, and I thought, wow, there's some similarities to the 23rd Psalm there, isn't there? Because whose rod and staff comforts me? He's not only my shepherd, he's my guide. Think about that with the 23rd Psalm. Now, the headdress is generally what he would wear. That would be what he'd wear in public. And you would see him, and sometimes when he ruled both upper and lower, there'd be two snakes on his coif there. Next slide, please. Pharaoh's name means great house. The house of Egypt is his. That is his house. and he cares for everybody. He protected the whole of Egypt. The Nile, the harvest, the sun, everything coming up. One of my studies I found out, can you imagine, and I'm getting ahead of myself, Randall, you can raise your hand and say stop. I thought of that for a minute. You know, his responsibility was there to pray for the Nile floods, and every morning his responsibility was plait a rod to bring the sun up. What happened during Moses' time, and there was one certain plague happened? Darkness. Ooh. How do you think the people felt then about Pharaoh? Hey, get back in there and do your job. Get back on that pedestal right there. You start praying a little harder. I can't imagine. How many days? 3 days. So, next slide. This is the Pharaoh's crown. And why I say that, we'll see this over and over again in hieroglyphics. The white is a crown and the red is a crown. They go together. And they can also be separate. Next slide. The red crown is for Lower Egypt and the white crown is for Upper Egypt. We will find over and over again in the record, in the hieroglyphs, especially when the kingdom was split and you had two pharaohs, one would be wearing a white and one would be wearing the red. And if it was, he had control of the whole of Egypt, they were put together. So we'll see this over and over again in the record. Next slide. This is my favorite. Oh, I hope you can see this. This is the first guy that we can call Pharaoh. His name is Nimri, or Nimmar. He was the first dynasty, and we think he's between 2,700 and 3,000. We're not for sure. We just think that's where we got to put him. Now, you see he's got a club there in one hand. He's got a head full of hair in the other on the left side. You see that? I don't know if this has got a laser on it or not. No. On the left one, you can see that he's got a head full of hair of somebody. Look at the crown. It's the white one. He's in charge of Upper Egypt. That right there tells me, okay, you guys are under my control. Now let's look to the back side or the right side. You probably can barely see it, but he's standing up there with people kneeling and saluting him, and he's got both crowns on. Another thing that's interesting here is the animals there. If you look right in the middle, I meant to have my daughter look at that and see what she thought. That looks like a dinosaur of some sort to me, but that's neither here nor there. We're not going to talk about that in this class, but I found that interesting. That animal is right there in the middle. But this shows that he's in complete power and complete control. He's the one that started it. That was found by accident, believe it or not. In 1897, it was found by a British Egyptologist, shipped off to London, and they found it a few years back and gave it back to Cairo. It's now in Cairo at the museum there. And I thought to myself, that is hard to believe that that's just been sitting around somewhere, and there's the guy that started it all. Next slide. Narmer. What do we know about him? Well, he's the first founder. You know, here's what happens after Narmer. You have the second dynasty becomes builders. They like to build. So they build these mastabas. Mastaba is a flat roof building that would have false, and they called them escalators. Don't ask me why I laughed when I heard the British Egyptologist explain it to me. He said they would have false rooms that would drop you 30, 40 feet, break a leg. It was their first tombs. They decided to start building these mastabas, these flat roof buildings, and they'd have a tomb in there for the pharaoh. Now, the third dynasty started the step pyramid. They decided, hey, we like this mastaba idea, but let's start putting things on top of it. And we have examples of step pyramids. And then the third dynasty is the step, and the fourth dynasty, Khufu, Kharfe, and Menkaure is what some people call it, or Menkar. Do anybody know what those are? They have buildings named after them. Next slide, please. Those three pharaohs just named are the three largest pyramids. That's theirs. The first four dynasties were builders. They built one of the seven wonders of the world. And then along came the fifth and sixth dynasty, and we go back to being tattered again. Which is amazing to me. Let's think about this. When the famine hits, which we'll see here in a minute, And Abraham is deciding to go take his family to Egypt because that's where the Nile is. It floods, gives food. We got to go there. They go to Egypt. Egypt, when Abraham decided to leave, was possibly 600 years old. Maybe even 700. I'm going to be conservative and say 6. How long has the United States been around? Are we at 250 yet? No. Egypt had been around 3 times what the United States had been when Abraham shows up. That's amazing to me. But I can't help but think, I look at that and think, in 4 dynasties, across 450 years, we get to that. Next slide. Pharaoh who met Abraham. This is where I like Dr. Gore. I talked about him earlier. Dr. Gore, he's a linear timeline person, and he will say it's in the 12th dynasty, a guy named Sunneret. Now, the problem with the 12th dynasty is this. These guys envied the pyramid makers, so they decided, let's build pyramids. Well, that's expensive to go quarry that rock and bring it up the Nile and quarry over here and quarry over there and put all this rock in one spot. Let's just build these pyramids out of mud bricks. And this Sunneret III's father built a huge pyramid. And if you get to go to Egypt, it's still there, but it looks like a mountain of just mud. The bricks just don't last as long as that granite does. Sunneret III was the most powerful pharaoh in Egypt at the time. He began to expand borders. He built forts to the south to block out the Nubians and the kingdom of Cush. But with all the discoveries we found now, it may be earlier, and the Bible does not say which pharaoh it is. You may find a book or a history book somewhere that'll say Sunneret III. But I just hate to say it. It might be earlier. It could be even, I saw one from Dr. David Rohl, R-O-H-L. You probably have seen him on Patterns of Evidence. He's the Egyptologist from England that's very famous. Has come to Nashville to speak. I saw one of his videos talk about it like this. He says, it's so tethered and scattered, he said, we just don't know for sure. But I do know what the Bible says is true. Because, like I said, who would be in charge if Abraham left for Egypt? Pharaoh. Guess who Abraham's going to meet? A Pharaoh. Next slide. Let's look at Genesis and let's see what happens in the Bible. Another thing about the early pharaohs, that one of the things I have to mention as we open the Bible, about being in charge, the early ones loved truth. And I mean that sincerely. You don't go into Pharaoh's court and lie to him and not let him find out. He loved truth. And most of them, if you got caught, and Randall gets to talk about that next week, you have the 2 people in jail, Joseph and the other guy. And, what's going to happen to one of those guys? He gets, as Joseph's in jail telling the story. I'll leave that for Randall. Pharaohs loved truth. Because you can imagine, with all the weight on their shoulders for running the country. Let's jump in here. Verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. Boy, we're going to hear that again, aren't we? I put a little mark in my Bible there. That's going to be in Genesis a continuing theme. There's a famine in Canaan, and the family of Israel is going to go to Egypt. Okay. And it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarah, his wife, Indeed, I know that you are a woman of beauty and countenance. Therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say you're my sister, and it may be well with me for your sake, that I may live because of you. It was not unusual for dignitaries to bring their family with them, and beautiful young ladies from foreign lands would come, and the Pharaoh would say, hey, I want to make you my wife. Mate, you're going to be my concubine in waiting for a while. This is not unusual. This happened. We can find it in the historical record. Now, Abraham is plotting here. He already knows something's going to happen. We got to think. Let's think now. Abraham is not a Bedouin traveler traveling with just a couple of sheep and a tent and his wife and his nephew. No. We've got to think. Abraham is like one of the sheiks in Saudi Arabia. He has a big house with lots of animals and lots of people. I read somewhere that at one point in time, Abraham may have had over 5,000 people just in his staff, in his area, to control the animals. So you have someone going to Egypt that's not just a Bedouin traveler that's going to make no noise. It's going to be somebody like, ooh, here comes a guy, especially with all those animals, which means wealth. He knows already he's going to catch the eye of the Pharaoh, because the guy who comes to visit, you got to still see the Pharaoh. Well, let's see what happens. There's the plot. We know through archaeological records it can happen. So let's see what happens. So it was when Abraham came into Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman, and she was very beautiful. And the princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Boy, Abraham knew right off the bat, didn't he? So he knew. But what happens? He treated Abraham well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. Now, I love the way they add that there, because that goes proof to the story. Abraham had a big entourage, because it's telling what he had. I mean, this guy's well off. He's coming into my kingdom. He's coming, what's he coming? Oh, he's bringing a pretty girl with him. Well, it don't turn out too good now. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abram's wife. Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you've done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go your way." Now, he had put her probably in ladies of waiting, is what that verse is telling me. He did what the noble thing at the time to do. She was shipped off to be a lady in waiting. And then the plagues came. Are we foreshadowing, folks? I can't help but think this is trying to tell me God's in control. Abraham's trying to save his neck. I'd probably do it too. But just her being in the house of Pharaoh, the plagues came. Doesn't tell me what plagues they were. There was just, he was afflicted. And somehow, some way, he figured it out real quick. Whoa, this is your wife, Abram. Why have you done this to me? And I can't help but think, up into the time of probably the 12th dynasty and that Sennacherib guy, pharaohs loved truth. And I can't help but this is one that felt but kind of betrayed. You didn't tell me the truth. Now, he probably was scared at this point because of plagues. If I kill this guy, I might be getting in really big trouble. Won't you just, what? Take her? What did Pharaoh say? Take her and go. I can't help but think, and my time is moving quickly. Mr. Randall's right. It's going to be fast. I got 5 minutes left. Right, 5:35 when the bell rings. I can't help but think this is telling me God is trying to say he's in control. Any thoughts and comments before I get to the next slide? One more slide, I think. Nope, that's it. Now, I'll even take a kind or snide remark. Which one? What? Go ahead, Patrick.
Is there any difference in the building of pyramids between Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, and one having the diameter of pyramids?
what happened is when we find out in the record is that when the countries united, building projects took place. When they're divided, not as many building projects took place. What we see in the record is when they're divided, upper and lower, when they're divided up, you'll get forts and palaces, you get other things, but you don't get these grand scale projects like you get. Because over and over again, if you get a chance, and I have to admit, I told Randall I'd say this, if you didn't look in your bulletin, there's a meeting coming up to go to the Holy Land in Egypt to see hopefully some of these things we're talking about. It's right in the middle of my Dave Ramsey plan. Oh. That means I want to go, but I know what I need to do. Go. Look at it. See it. And you will see when they'll tell you, and these tour guides they'll say this is the 12th dynasty when Signoret was around. Now, I like this Signoret guy a lot, and I thought I had a photo of him. He might have got deleted. I don't know. I thought I had, but he looked like he had the weight of the world. His poor ears were stuck out. He had the crown on, and he looked like he had the weight of the world on his shoulder. And he has his nose broken off because every time a new pharaoh would come along or a new family come along, their favorite thing was to erase you. And we didn't have the computers back then to push erase or the trash can to send things to a trash can. No, you usually took a pickaxe and picked off the faces of the statues. That's why we see a lot of the pharaohs' statues messed up. They didn't like that guy. So we also see in the record that the female line was the line the pharaoh came through. And that plays an important role coming up in a class that I'll teach about Moses. Because the Pharaoh might have been the leader, but you ladies in Egypt had the power.
You had to marry his sister.
Yep, had to marry. We're going to get into that too. We had a lot of sister marriages at the time. Now, the lineage had to come through the wife, which I think is amazing. It's the only thing I can find in ancient civilization they did it that way. And we get problems in dynasties with pharaohs who have nothing but daughters, and they have a son with a concubine, and the way they get around that, they make him marry a sister. We're going to see that, to get around that lineage from the wife. So, very interesting. Any more thoughts and comments? Good comment, Patrick. I got about 3 minutes left, and the class is yours. Bell's going to ring. I hope you've enjoyed it. I did. It was a lot of fun studying Egypt. I wished I could have shown that picture of Setnanet III. He is a poor-looking fellow. So.